Hey everybody, Lynsey G here. I am trying this whole video thing for the first time in a while. Please bear with me. So, it is Bisexual Awareness Week, aka hashtag #BiWeek, and honestly, I was pretty much planning on skipping it. I've been pretty out about my queerness for years, except to my family. Hey family, if you're watching this, I have news. But I've pretty much avoided labeling myself specifically as any one particular orientation. I've identified as queer for a long time, but as some of you may know, queer is more of an umbrella term for anything that's not specifically, heterosexual, cisgender, patriarchal bullshit. But I've just been calling myself queer and moving right along. And in fact, I actually wrote about that identification or lack thereof in my book, Watching Porn. I've actually committed onto paper and into ebook form and into audiobook form the fact that I started identifying as queer rather than bisexual when I realized that I wasn't attracted to only two genders. And that was it for me. And that was years ago, probably about a decade ago. But since I wrote about it in, 2015 or 2016, I have done some thinking and some evolving, and so has the language around what bisexuality means. And also, there's been much more conversation about the term pansexuality, and there's been lots of discussion about queerness itself. So, this year, 2020, seems like a good time to kind of take another look at it and my own identification and what these terms mean. So here we go. So, okay, the word bisexuality, right? A lot of people think that because of the prefix bi right there at the beginning, there's an implication that being bisexual means you adhere to the gender binary. You believe that there are two genders, male and female, and that's it. That's the end of the story. Full stop. So back in 2010, or whenever it was that I decided to start really looking at my own sexual identity, I realized that gender didn't actually have much of an impact on who I found myself attracted to. I was attracted to men and women, yes, but I was also attracted to some people who identified as gender non-binary, gender fluid, trans folks who were, in between these two, by the way, socially constructed ends of the gender spectrum. And I realized that the term bisexual felt too limiting to me. So I decided that I was going to get rid of it in my own identification. I was going to identify as queer. Since then, there's been a lot more conversation about what bisexual actually means. And a lot of people who identify as bisexual reject the idea that they are only into men or women. I suppose and, since it's bi. So they reject the idea that bisexual means men and women only. And a lot of people who identify as bisexual, since they're the ones who identify that way, feel that they should have control over what the term means. And I actually really like that idea. I think the people who identify any particular way should have, the final say in what that means to them. So awesome. But for me, I think it does still feel a little bit limiting. But since then, there's been a growing conversation about what the word bisexual actually means, and a lot of it is driven by people who identify as bisexual. A lot of people who are bisexual say that rather than bisexual meaning men and women, only two genders, it means an attraction to more than one gender, which could be all of them, or could be just two, or could be five, or whatever your number is. So cool, I'm into that. For me, it still feels a little bit limiting because it kind of makes me feel like every time I discover that I am attracted to someone of a different gender, that I need to add that to my list. Oh, okay, genderqueer, check. And to me, that just feels a little bit limiting. I don't want to have to question my attraction to someone based on their gender. That just feels silly. And it doesn't feel like it applies to me. So that's a little bit on the stifling end for me personally. But now there's this really cool term called pansexual, and a whole lot of people who are identifying as pansexual. And pansexual and bisexual have a lot of overlap, but whereas bisexual tends to mean attraction to more than one gender, pansexual means attraction to people regardless of gender. So whereas for me, at least, the idea of, making like a list of genders that I'm attracted to feels a little bit limiting, pansexual is much more open and is like, yeah, just be attracted to people. It doesn't matter what gender they identify as. And to me, that actually feels right. It feels like that's how I am when I get a crush on people, or when I'm, physically attracted to someone. I don't look at that person and think, oh, they are X gender, therefore it's okay for me to feel this attraction. It's more like, oh, I feel attraction, and gender really doesn't have anything to do with it. So I feel good about identifying as pansexual myself. But here's the thing. I think a lot of people who are my age, which is mid to late 30s and older, tend to identify as bisexual, whether pansexual is maybe a better fit or not. And again, this is a huge generalization. I don't mean to say that this is true for everybody. But, a lot of people I know in my age group who I think may fall under the pansexual category, they choose to continue to identify as bisexual. That feels more comfortable for them. Because when we were growing up, if you were attracted to more than one gender, bisexual was the only term that we had to describe ourselves. I'm sure that there were some very forward-thinking people out there who used the term pansexual, but it wasn't really nearly as recognized as it is now as an actual sexual orientation. So I think a lot of us olds just prefer bisexual rather than pansexual. And there are a lot of people who identify as both bi and pan. And I think that's legit. Again, you are the person who gets to decide how you identify and what that means for you. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I feel like, as long as the things that you identify with and the terms that you identify with are not hurting anyone, go for it. Have a blast. Identify however you want. But I guess that there is a little bit of a lingering question for some other people about whether bisexual is limiting and in any way damaging. So for me, I think that at this point in my sexual orientation journey, I don't really feel like bisexual necessarily fits, but I also feel a little bit like pansexual is me sort of co-opting a newer, younger people's language, and that maybe it's not quite fitting for me as someone who's older and who grew up as bisexual to take on. I'm not sure if that's a legitimate way to feel or not, but I do know that I feel that way, so I'm talking about it. And I wonder if anyone else out there has had this experience, people who are a little bit older and who grew up considering themselves bisexual, if they feel any resistance to taking on the mantle of pansexual or not. I guess to me, it kind of feels like I'm trying to use young people's terminology and I just look silly doing it. Like if I'm like, oh yes, I'm going to yeet this pen. Yeet. I feel like a fraud. I feel like younger people are going to see me doing that and be like, oh my God, Mom, what the hell? So that's something that kind of holds me back. And furthermore, to complicate matters even more, I like the bi flag better than I like the pansexual flag. It's just a color preference thing. But I still don't really feel that comfortable identifying as straight up bisexual. So maybe what I am is somewhere between the two. And I can use either term depending on the audience that I'm speaking to and what they're more likely to understand. I think that's okay. Because again, I get to identify myself the way that I feel most comfortable. And if I'm not perfectly comfortable with one or the other, maybe I can be a little bit of both. So anyway, that's about it. I just wanted to take this opportunity during Bi Awareness Week to talk a little bit about my own orientation and about the different terminology that's used for people who identify as bisexual and or pansexual, and what those definitions mean and what those orientations mean. And I know that I'm still on my own personal journey of figuring out who I am and what I like, what I'm attracted to, and I think that the terminology around these things is also on its own journey. Maybe a few years from now, bisexual will mean something very different culturally than it does now. Maybe it won't. We'll see. But growth is an awesome journey to be on, and I think that language grows and changes just like people grow and change, and the way that we understand sexual orientations and so much more about our identities continues to grow and change, and that's pretty awesome. That's it. See you later.